In 1955, just 6 months before his death, Albert Einstein granted an interview to young American journalist Michael Brennan that was immediately sealed in Princeton University's most classified archives. For 70 years, this recording has remained locked away, marked only as sensitive material by Einstein's own family. The Einstein estate has refused all requests for access, maintaining strict silence about whatever Einstein revealed that day. Government officials have repeatedly attempted to gain access, only to be turned away by Princeton's Board of Trustees. Even Nobel laureates and heads of state have been denied permission to hear this recording. But now, during a routine digitization of Princeton's historical archives, this recording has finally been uncovered. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about death, consciousness, and what happens when we leave this world. This is the interview humanity wasn't ready for in 1955, and some argue we still aren't ready for today. The file is marked with a handwritten red E and contains only one note: for future humanity, MB. The recording begins with static, then Einstein's unmistakable voice emerges, measured and deliberate, as if weighing each word carefully. The setting is his Princeton office, identifiable by the characteristic sound of his grandfather clock tick-tocking rhythmically in the background. Brennan had arrived that November morning intending to discuss relativity theory, but the conversation took an unexpected turn when Einstein, gazing through his window at falling autumn leaves, posed a question that changed everything. "Herr Brennan," Einstein said in his German-accented English, "have you ever wondered what happens to information when we die? I don't mean memories or thoughts, but the very essence that makes us unique." Brennan, caught off guard, replied that he assumed everything simply ceased. Einstein shook his head slowly, an enigmatic smile playing at his lips. "Ah, my young friend, that is humanity's greatest misconception. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. And consciousness, my dear fellow, is the purest form of energy that exists." The physicist rose and walked to his bookshelf, footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. "For years, I've studied the laws governing our physical universe. But there's a dimension conventional science refuses to explore, the continuity of consciousness beyond bodily death. I'm not speaking of religion or superstition, but of quantum physics applied to the nature of the human soul." Einstein paused, as if deciding whether to continue. The clock's ticking seemed to grow louder in that tension-filled silence. "In 1952, Einstein continued, lowering his voice, "I conducted a series of undocumented experiments with a group of quantum physicists from Harvard. Our goal was to map human consciousness at the moment of transition, what you call death." Brennan leaned forward, clearly fascinated. "And what did you discover, Professor?" Einstein smiled, but there was profound melancholy in his eyes. "We discovered that death is an illusion created by our limited perception of time and space. Consciousness simply migrates to a different dimensional frequency." The scientist returned to his desk and unlocked a drawer, withdrawing a black leather journal. "Everything is documented here, in meticulous detail, but the world wasn't ready in 1952, and I fear it still isn't today." He thumbed through pages covered with complex equations and intricate diagrams. "You see, Brennan, when a person dies, their consciousness doesn't dissipate. It transforms, following the same laws that govern energy transformation. There exists a parallel dimension where all consciousness that has ever existed continues to exist." Brennan asked how this was scientifically possible. Einstein leaned back in his chair, eyes gleaming with the passion of discovery. "Imagine our three-dimensional universe as a thin slice of bread in a multi-dimensional loaf. Death is simply the process of our consciousness sliding from one slice to another. Quantum mechanics suggests that information is never lost. It merely changes state. Human consciousness is pure information and therefore indestructible." The physicist rose again and drew equations on his blackboard that Brennan admitted not understanding. "The proof lies here, in the very equations that describe quantum reality. Consciousness exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously. What we experience as life is merely our focused perception on one of these dimensions. In death, our perception simply expands to include all others." "But how did you test this?" asked Brennan, his voice revealing skepticism mixed with fascination. Einstein stopped writing and turned slowly. "Through observation of people in clinical death states. We discovered that during moments of transition, the brain emits a specific frequency pattern that can be detected and mapped. This frequency corresponds exactly to theoretical calculations predicting the existence of parallel dimensions. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Einstein quickly closed the journal and returned it to the drawer. "We'll continue another time," he said quietly, but that time never came. 6 months later, Einstein was dead. Brennan tried repeatedly to access the information again, but was always prevented by the university and Einstein's family. The recording remained forgotten until a computer technician discovered the files during routine digitization. When the recording resumes, Einstein is discussing personal experiences. "I myself have had glimpses of this other dimension during near-death episodes. In 1917, when I contracted a serious illness, I experienced what I can only describe as an expansion of consciousness. I saw not only my past, but also elements of my future that subsequently materialized." His voice carried rare vulnerability. "It wasn't a dream or hallucination. It was an experience as real as this conversation we're having now." Brennan asked if Einstein believed we could communicate with those who've died. The scientist chuckled softly. "Communication implies separation, my young man. In multidimensional reality, there is no separation. The consciousness we love continues with us, just in frequencies our limited senses cannot normally detect. But there are moments, in dreams, deep meditation, altered states of consciousness, when the barriers dissolve." "Professor," Brennan said hesitantly, "why are you telling me this? Why now?" Einstein walked to the window, contemplating the autumn campus. "Because I sense my time here is ending, and because humanity needs to understand that death is not an end, but a transformation. Fear of death has kept our species imprisoned by unnecessary limitations. If we knew the truth, we would live differently." The physicist returned to his desk and picked up a paper with scribbled notes. "Consciousness is like a wave in the ocean. It appears individual and separate when viewed closely, but it's an integral part of the infinite ocean. Death is simply the moment when the wave returns to the ocean, not ceasing to exist but expanding into something greater." His words were poetic, but his conviction was absolutely scientific. "Is there empirical evidence for all this?" Brennan insisted. Einstein nodded gravely. "More than you can imagine. But the scientific community isn't ready to accept data that fundamentally challenges our understanding of reality. They prefer to ignore evidence that doesn't fit established paradigms." He sighed deeply. "Someday, perhaps in decades or centuries, humanity will be mature enough to accept these truths." The recording then presents a dramatic pause, followed by Einstein's voice, more intense. "There's something more, Brennan. Something we discovered that could be dangerous if misinterpreted." The journalist encouraged him to continue. "We found that consciousness can influence physical reality even after the body dies. What people call ghosts or hauntings are actually consciousness patterns trying to interact with our dimension from theirs." Einstein moved away from his desk, pacing thoughtfully. "But here's what's truly profound. We discovered that all consciousness is connected. Your grandmother who passed, my colleague who died last year, they're not lost. They exist in a state we might call dimensional consciousness, where individual identity merges with collective awareness, while somehow maintaining its unique essence." "Professor," Brennan interjected, "doesn't this contradict everything we understand about physics?" Einstein stopped pacing, his eyes bright with conviction. "No, it completes it. Classical physics describes only one slice of reality. Quantum mechanics hints at multiple dimensions. What I'm describing is the next level, quantum consciousness theory. The mathematics are beautiful, elegant, and completely consistent with known laws." The physicist walked to his blackboard again, drawing diagrams that seemed to dance with possibility. "Look at these equations, Brennan. They predict that consciousness exists in quantum superposition, simultaneously in multiple states, until observed or measured. Death is simply the collapse of our limited three-dimensional consciousness into a broader multidimensional state." "Have others reached similar conclusions?" asked Brennan. Einstein smiled sadly. "A few brilliant minds have touched on these concepts. Tesla understood some of it. So did Planck, though he never published his thoughts. The truth is, this knowledge has existed throughout history, but only now do we have the scientific framework to prove it." The recording quality becomes clearer as Einstein continues. The implications are staggering. If death is merely a transformation, then our current behavior patterns, our societies, our fears, all need fundamental revision. We're living as if we're temporary beings when in fact, we're eternal consciousness having a temporary physical experience. Einstein paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. I've calculated that consciousness retains coherent information for at least several centuries after physical death. And in those calculations I found something extraordinary. Patterns suggesting that consciousness can choose when and how to reincarnate, if at all. It's not random or based on any religious doctrine. It's a conscious choice made from the expanded perspective of multidimensional awareness. The young journalist's voice shows growing excitement. Professor, this is revolutionary. It would change everything, philosophy, science, how we live our lives. Einstein nodded slowly. Precisely why I'm telling only you, and why this recording must remain sealed until humanity is ready. Imagine the chaos if this became public knowledge prematurely. Wars have been fought over lesser revelations, but surely some evidence could be shared safely, Brennan pressed. Einstein walked back to his locked drawer, hesitating. There might be a way to prepare humanity gradually. The key lies in understanding that consciousness is the fundamental force of the universe, not matter as we've assumed. Matter, energy, space, and time are all expressions of consciousness, not the other way around. The physicist unlocked his drawer again, removing several photographs. These images were taken during our experiments. They show energy patterns around individuals at the moment of death, patterns that suggest dimensional transfer rather than cessation. Brennan asked to see them, but Einstein quickly returned them to the drawer. Not yet, my friend. Perhaps never. A profound silence filled the room before Einstein continued. What haunts me is not the fear of my own death, but the fear that humanity will waste precious decades or centuries living in ignorance of their true nature. We are multidimensional beings, Brennan. Death is no more final than the setting sun is the destruction of the sun. Professor, Brennan asked softly, do you fear death? Einstein smiled, and for the first time in the recording, he seemed completely at peace. How can one fear transformation? I am eager to experience existence from the expanded perspective that awaits. My only regret is leaving this work unfinished, these discoveries unshared. The clock in the background chimed the hour, a reminder of time's passage in this dimension. Einstein stood, moved to his window one last time. Before you leave, Brennan, I want you to understand something profound. The love we feel for others doesn't die with the body. In fact, in the multidimensional state, love becomes even more powerful, more real. Those we've lost are closer than we imagine. Will I remember this conversation when I'm there? Asked Brennan. Einstein turned from the window, his expression complex. You'll remember everything, understand everything, and finally comprehend how all experiences, all relationships, all learning contributes to the infinite tapestry of consciousness. Death is not forgetting, it's remembering everything you truly are. As the recording continues, Einstein's voice becomes more passionate. Let me share something that will astound you. In our experiments, we found that some consciousness patterns could actually influence events in our dimension from the other side, not through supernatural means, but through quantum entanglement principles that extend beyond physical death. Einstein walked to another part of his office, opening a cabinet filled with strange instruments. These devices detect what we call consciousness resonance. When a loved one passes away, they leave quantum-entangled connections with those they cared about. These connections can carry information, emotions, even warnings. Are you saying the dead can warn the living? Brennan asked incredulously. Einstein handling one of the strange devices, which emitted a soft humming sound. Not in the Hollywood sense, my dear fellow, but through quantum mechanics, yes. I've documented cases where people received what they thought were hunches or intuitions that later saved their lives. These weren't coincidences. They were quantum communications from dimensional consciousness. The physicist set down the device and returned to his desk. But here's the most incredible discovery of all. We found that consciousness doesn't just continue after death. It evolves. It grows exponentially in understanding and capability. The consciousness that leaves this dimension is like a child compared to what it becomes in the expanded state. Professor, Brennan interrupted, his voice trembling, if this is true, why is death still so feared? Why do we grieve? Einstein's expression softened. because we're experiencing separation only from our limited three-dimensional perspective. It's like crying because the sun has set, not understanding that from a higher vantage point, the sun never stops shining. The scientist stood and began drawing more complex diagrams on his blackboard. The mathematics proved that consciousness operates on at least 11 dimensions simultaneously. In death, we simply focus our awareness on more of these dimensions at once. What feels like loss to us is actually liberation for the deceased. Einstein paused his drawing and turned to face Brennan directly. I want to tell you about the most profound case we documented. A colleague of mine, Dr. Heinrich Weber, passed away during one of our experiments. Through our instruments, we detected his consciousness pattern continuing for 43 days after clinical death. But more remarkably, we could communicate with this pattern. The room fell silent, except for the clock's ticking. Brennan eventually whispered, "What did he say?" Einstein closed his eyes as if reliving the moment. He said that death was like waking from a dream into a far more vivid reality. He described existence without the limitations of linear time, where past, present, and future coexist. He said he could see the entire pattern of his life, understanding connections and purposes that were invisible while embodied. Did Dr. Weber give any proof it was really him? Brennan asked. Einstein nodded gravely. He provided information only he could know. Mathematical proofs he had been working on, personal details about our conversations, even predictions about future events that later came to pass. The evidence was undeniable. The physicist returned to his seat, suddenly looking tired. But the most important message Dr. Weber conveyed was this: consciousness is homework. Each lifetime is an assignment to learn specific lessons, develop certain qualities, and contribute to the evolution of universal consciousness. Death is simply graduation to the next level of existence. Einstein pulled out another journal, this one bound in blue leather. In this book, I've recorded communications from hundreds of consciousness patterns. Each one confirms the same thing. Death is not the end of you. It's the beginning of the real you. Professor, Brennan said, his voice now filled with wonder rather than skepticism, how does reincarnation fit into this model? Einstein smiled. Good question. We found that consciousness can choose to return to three-dimensional experience for continued learning. But it's always optional. Most consciousness patterns eventually choose to remain in the expanded state, helping guide those still in physical bodies. The scientist opened the blue journal, revealing pages of detailed notes. We discovered what we call soul groups, clusters of consciousness that often incarnate together over multiple lifetimes, playing different roles to facilitate each other's growth. Your mother in this life might have been your child in a previous one. Einstein stood again, moving to look out at the campus. Fall was giving way to winter, leaves nearly all fallen. The most beautiful aspect of our discoveries is this: every consciousness is precious and eternal. No one is ever truly lost. We're all part of an infinite tapestry of existence, each thread unique but connected to the whole. Professor, Brennan said quietly, you mentioned dangers if this knowledge is misunderstood. What did you mean? Einstein turned from the window, his expression serious. Some might use this knowledge to justify harmful behavior, thinking death isn't real. Others might become paralyzed by the implications. And some might try to force communication with the departed, not understanding that such connection happens naturally when appropriate. The physicist walked to his desk and locked both journals in the drawer. The knowledge must come gradually, Brennan. Humanity must mature emotionally and spiritually before receiving the full truth. That's why this recording must remain sealed until the time is right. As the interview continues, Einstein shares more personal revelations. I've been visited by my dear friend Michel Besso since his death 3 months ago, not in a mystical sense, but through quantum consciousness resonance. He's shown me mathematical concepts that have advanced my understanding by decades. Einstein moved to yet another part of his office, revealing a wall covered with complex photographs and charts. These images show consciousness patterns of individuals at different stages after death. Notice how the patterns become more complex, more beautiful over time. It's as if death is the beginning of an accelerated evolutionary process. Professor, Brennan asked, studying the images, do you think we'll ever be able to prove this to the wider scientific community? Einstein laughed, but not unkindly. My dear fellow, we've already proven it. The problem isn't lack of evidence. It's the inability of mainstream science to accept paradigm-shifting discoveries. The scientist returned to his chair, seeming to contemplate his next words carefully. Perhaps the most profound thing we've learned is that consciousness is the ground of all being. What we think of as physical reality is actually the dream of universal consciousness. We're not separate beings having individual experiences. We're facets of one infinite awareness, exploring itself subjectively. Einstein paused, hearing footsteps in the hallway outside his office. Our time grows short, Brennan, but I want to leave you with this. Your consciousness is immortal, beautiful, and more powerful than you can imagine. Death is simply the moment when you remember who you truly are. Professor, Brennan said urgently, is there anything we can do to prepare for this transition? To make death easier? Einstein smiled warmly. Live fully, love completely, and have no regrets. Understand that every experience, pleasant or painful, contributes to your consciousness evolution. And remember, those you love are never truly gone. The recording quality shifts as Einstein continues. I've spent 76 years in this body, and I can tell you with scientific certainty that the most important truth is this. Love is the only reality. Everything else, fear, separation, death itself, is illusion created by limited perspective. As the interview nears its end, Einstein's voice takes on an almost prophetic quality. The next great scientific revolution will not come from studying matter, but from studying consciousness. And when it does, humanity will finally understand what I'm sharing with you today. Death is not the opposite of life. It's life expanded beyond current comprehension. Einstein stood and walked to his desk one final time. Brennan, I'm going to give you something. He opened the locked drawer and withdrew a small notebook. These are my personal observations about the nature of consciousness and death. Hide it well. Perhaps in 30 or 40 years, humanity will be ready for these truths. Brennan accepted the notebook with trembling hands. Professor, how can I thank you for sharing all this? Einstein placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. By living your life with the knowledge that death is not an ending, but a magnificent transformation. And perhaps when the time is right, by sharing this truth with others who are ready to hear it. The final exchange is barely audible, as if Einstein is speaking more to himself than to Brennan. 40 years of studying the universe, and only now I truly understand. We are not beings having a spiritual experience. We are spirit having a human experience. The physical world is the illusion, not the spiritual one. The recording ends with the sound of the door closing as Brennan leaves. Einstein apparently continued working at his desk, the clock still ticking, marking time in a dimension that, according to his own theories, is just one of many we simultaneously inhabit. 70 years later, this interview finally comes to light. Einstein's words carry weight not just because of who he was, but because of the conviction in his voice, the detailed scientific backing he provides, and the profound implications of his discoveries. As he predicted, humanity is still struggling to accept these concepts, but perhaps now in our current age of quantum computing and dimensional physics, we're finally ready to seriously consider Einstein's most radical theory of all. The question remains, was Einstein's final gift to humanity this glimpse into the true nature of existence and death? And if so, what are we going to do with this knowledge? The choice, as he might say, exists in quantum superposition until we collapse it through our own consciousness and decision. This is more than a scientific theory. It's a complete paradigm shift that challenges everything we think we know about life, death, and our place in the universe. Einstein's secret interview doesn't just reveal what happens after death, it reveals what we truly are. Eternal, multidimensional beings temporarily focused in a three-dimensional experience we call life. As Einstein himself concluded in those final moments of the recording, death is not the end of the story. It's simply turning the page to chapter 2 of an infinite book. If this interview is authentic, and all evidence suggests it is, then we're living in the most exciting time in human history, the moment when science and spirituality finally converge, when ancient wisdom meets modern physics, and when humanity begins to understand its true eternal nature. What do you think? Are you ready to embrace Einstein's radical vision of death as transformation rather than termination? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's start a conversation that Einstein himself would have wanted us to have. Don't forget to like this post if it shifted your perspective. Subscribe for more content that challenges conventional thinking. And ring that notification bell because we're just getting started on this journey into consciousness and the true nature of reality. After all, as Einstein suggested, we're not just watching from the sidelines, we're active participants in a cosmic dance of consciousness that continues long after the music of this life appears to end. Remember, you are not your body, you are not your thoughts, you are eternal consciousness experiencing a temporary physical adventure. And that, according to Einstein's final interview, changes everything. In a world where we're constantly told that this life is all there is, Einstein's secret interview offers hope, wonder, and a completely new understanding of what it means to be human. The greatest physicist who ever lived spent his final months uncovering the greatest mystery of all, and now, finally, we can share in that discovery. The universe is far stranger, far more beautiful, and far more meaningful than we ever imagined. Death is not the end of the adventure, it's just the beginning of the real journey. Thanks to Einstein's courage in sharing this forbidden knowledge with one young journalist, we now have a glimpse of the magnificent truth that awaits us all.